My name is Bill Morgan. We teach the first Saturday and the following Tuesday on creation versus evolution topics. And tonight we're going to talk about the age of the earth. But let's open with prayer. Father, we're humbled before you when we look at the great creation, and we honor you. We worship you. We thank you for everyone here tonight. We pray to learn and have good fellowship. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen. Okay, a couple Saturdays ago, one of my buddies was sitting in front of me. He turned around and he had me one of those calendar quizzes, and it talked about DNA in the human body, and it instantly became one of my favorite witnessing questions. About a week, exactly 1 week ago, I was in New York City. I debated an atheist there twice. We'll be getting a DVD of it. I think it went really well. He was by far the best debater I've ever matched up against, but I do feel it went well for our side. But my first slide was this. And you know what? I'll give a prize. Who wants to volunteer and play part of our contest? If you want to play part of our contest, stand up. It'll be the honor system. Stand up if you want to. You'll get an incredible prize if you win. Come on, I need at least 5 people. All right, there's one. Roger, I know you're not shy. Okay. All right, so think of an answer in your head. Don't change it based upon other answers, okay? Everybody got one in their head? How many miles of DNA? Okay, Carol, why don't you go first?
25.
25? How could 25 miles of DNA fit in a human?
I don't know.
Okay, no, I'm just teasing. Roger, what do you think? How many?
A million.
A million? What do you think?
I have to say yes, a million.
Okay, you can go up or one. Up.
Okay, a million and one.
Okay. Okay,
Jeopardy.
6 million. What do you think? 3, and last guess?
I was going to say 50.
50 million? You win, sir.
No, I was at 50, just 50.
Oh, 50 miles. You don't win. 6 million, you win. Could you give that to the... But you're not even close. The answer is 85 billion miles, ladies and gentlemen. I want you to dwell on that just a little bit. You have 85 billion miles of DNA in your body. Okay? Gonna guess how many times that could reach the sun and back. The answer is 900 times. Now, I was teasing Carol when she said a mile, 25 miles. Not even close, 85 billion miles. Now, this will really flip your lid. If you coiled it up into a ball, it would fit inside a tablespoon. Now, I used to have slides on that, but 2 people I talked to, including my wife, who's very intelligent, were so blown away they couldn't even conceptualize that. But it's about the width of 2 atoms, pretty much. But that's how much you have in your body. Now, when I debated the gentleman, PhD in biology, last week, that was the first thing I started with. And I talked about it just a little bit. Now, that's not just 85 billion miles of stuff. It's incredible structural engineering, chemical engineering, mechanical engineering. It's constantly making copies of itself all day long. We have 85 billion miles of DNA in our body. It's my new question that I ask. If you work with someone who's neutral or not even thinking about God, start with this. And you can easily glorify God with it. And it's 85 billion miles of information. The DNA determines the size and shape of your eyebrows, your hair, your skull, your eyelashes, your eyelids, your tear ducts, your teeth, your nose hair. 85 billion miles of information. And it's got error correction in it. It's copying constantly, and most of the copying errors it can correct. So I asked my opponent if he believed this was the result of design or chance, and you can guess what his answer was. Never addressed it at all.
No.
Why would he, right?
Dodge the kid.
Yes, he dodged the question, absolutely right. So, quick review on my debate in New York. First off, New Yorkers are very nice people, but oh, am I glad I live here. Has anybody ever tried to drive through Manhattan? Unbelievably crowded. Nice people. But anyways, I debated him. I read his book before he went. He just gave name after name of all these fossils and beautiful cartoon drawings of these fossils. Whereas I like to make the point, drawings are not science. You can make a cartoon drawing of anything. But he just threw out a lot of those, and you might want to see the debate sometime. I kept bringing up laws of science, the origin of life. Life only comes from what? Life. How did we get 85 billion miles of DNA? The chicken and the egg, origin of sexual reproduction, the origin of the universe. And he just kept avoiding these, which he has to, because if you believe that humans have bacterial ancestors, it's pretty hard to defend using science. But anyways, since I didn't believe his cartoon drawings, we had 2 debates. The second one, he got angrier and angrier. Guess what he called me?
Christian.
No. No. Liar! He says he either doesn't know the evidence or he's a liar. And I responded with, well, Dr. John, you hurt my feelings. You called me a liar. I read your entire book. And if cartoon drawings are scientific evidence, Dr. Jan, you have won this debate. But I choose to go with laws of science, genetics, biochemistry, etc. Now, we have here some books, all for cost. We got $2 books, which refutes their latest arguments. We got $10 books, it's an incredibly good read. Each chapter is a different subject. A whole bunch of DVDs. They're all $5. And we have a email sign-up list. Could you give one to each side? If you want to get the newsletter by email, oops, I'm sorry. Feel free to sign up. And I'm always open to suggestions about topics, how we could make the meetings better. Please let me know. Next month, we have a very exciting meeting. I'm going to be out of town, but we have a friend of mine who's given this lesson many times. Promise you, it's on our level. It's not on the PhD level. Some very simple lessons on cavemen, because a lot of people talk about them. I was reading GQ, the other one's reading A History of the Greek City-States. I love that commercial. Anyone else? I have TiVo. It's one of the few commercials that I stop scanning by when they're on. But cavemen, next month, and then the following Tuesday. Tonight we're going to talk about the age of the earth, an important topic. A lot of people bring it up. Now, suppose you got in a car accident and you broke your wrist. Is that important?
Yes.
Yes. Suppose you got in a car accident, you broke your wrist, and you also sliced your jugular vein. Is the broken wrist still important? It's still important, but it's not as important. Now, some people might get mad at me. Age of the earth is important, but to me, it's not the most important topic. I am strongly, firmly, well, sometimes people say, Bill, are you young or old earth? Guess what I say? I say, oh, I'm old earth. 6,000 years old. Bada bing, okay? That's a long time. It's not like we're talking about yesterday's. I believe the earth is about 6,000 years old. I think it's an important topic. But the most important topic is a relationship with Jesus Christ. Now, let me introduce you to someone who is a young earth creationist, who believes the Bible is the Word of God, and Jesus died for people's sins. You know who that young earth creationist is? Satan. Right? Satan has all the proper intellectual beliefs, in my opinion, but he doesn't have the relationship. So if I meet an atheist, and my lessons and what I do know is not from reading a lot of books, it's from a lot of street witnessing. I've gone to many colleges, I've talked to a lot of people, and if they bring up a point that stumps me, I study that topic. If I'm on a college campus and I'm talking to an atheist and he brings up the age of the earth, I will frequently say, I'm sure you believe the earth is billions. I do believe it's thousands. But I'll give you trillions of years. I'll give you even more time than you want for now, because I want to make the point of design. That means there's a designer, and the designer is Jesus Christ. You can talk for a long time about the age of the earth. I'm not sure that will lead someone to a relationship with Christ. But I'll just talk for myself, if I believe this earth was billions of years old, I would be ashamed of my Bible. It's my comment. I've read the Bible many times, and I do not believe any old earth Christian got it from the Bible. They got it from peer pressure coming into them. I'll share a blessing that I've had in my life. My walk was, first I became a creationist. I believed creation was true, and then I loved to read. I said, I'm going to read the Bible. I personally thank God the first time I read the Bible and it was cover to cover, I didn't have a commentary. Any quick amens to that?
Amen.
Commentaries are great. The first time I read it, I didn't have one. I got out a 3-ring binder and I made all kinds of notes, alphabetical, and it was just a blast. So I read Genesis chapter 1. To me, it's the clearest thing in the world. Literal days, a short creation. I had no problem with that. So anyways, I'm a single guy. I'm a Christian fella. I'm in a Christian Bible study. And this cute girl says to me, Bill, I heard you like creation. And I said, oh yeah, I love creation. She goes, would you teach a Bible study to our junior high group? Well, I almost have a heart attack. Oh, public speaking. I was petrified. But I decided to do it. And basically, I made a comic book like that. I got up there, I said, hi, I'm Bill Morgan. I'm going to read the part of a teacher. I need 3 volunteers to read the students' parts. So we did that. Then I started calling churches out of the phone book and offering free lessons on creation. I had a lot of zeal and a little bit of knowledge. God was awesome. The first groups were tiny. I was at a little study about the size of a card table. I'm the invited expert. And this lady asked me, Bill, what do you think about the day-age movement? And I'm the invited expert. I had read the Bible without a commentary. I said, what's that? I still remember she was sitting there. She said, you know the belief that the days in Genesis are millions of years long. I said, come on, Christians don't believe that, do they? I had never heard of that before. And she goes, oh, absolutely. And I said, well, I got to look into this. I had never even got a sniff of that from reading the Bible. So if you are witnessing to someone, I strongly suggest you encourage them to read Matthew, John, and Genesis with no commentary the first time. Okay? Let them read the Word of God without the comments. I may have read Genesis, and there might have been a comment saying, these are not normal days. They're millions or billions of years long. And I might have been saying, wow, I guess so. But I was lucky. I didn't have a commentary. And my theology pretty much has been built upon the first time I read through the Bible without a commentary. So anyways, age of the earth. How old is it? Well, who knows?
God.
God knows, but do we? Nobody does know. I don't know. The geologists at UCLA don't know. Nobody knows for sure. Well, who cares? Many people care. Once again, it is important, but to me, not the most important topic out there. The relationship with Christ is most important, but within the church, I think it's very important for biblical trust. Okay? There's one thing I'm certain of. Anybody know what that is? The earth is at least 49 years old. For my dad, it's at least 82 years old. For some other people, it's at least 100 years old. Other than that, we have to make assumptions because it's beyond our time frame. Okay, who's that? Clint Eastwood. When it comes to estimating the age of the earth, what do you think my next quote's going to be?
You feel lucky.
Make my day.
Do you feel lucky? Make my day. Make my yam. Right?
I know what you're thinking.
A man's got to know his limitations. In science, you have to know your limitations, okay? And that's what we're going to talk about. There are limitations to estimating the age of the earth. There's 3 possible ways to what? Try to estimate the age of the earth. Once again, nobody knows how old it is. 100 years ago, people were certain the earth was several hundred million years old, right? Now they're certain it's 4.6 billion years old. Well, 100 years ago, you would have been laughed at for believing it's thousands. We know it's about 500 million years old. Now it's like, we know it's 4.6 billion years old. I estimate they're going to get older and older eventually. But there's 3 possible ways. History is a good clue to how old the earth is. You can use science, and you can use the Bible, okay? Tonight I'm going to team teach with Ron over here. He's going to do a lot of the science arguments. I'm going to do a couple, and he'll be coming up later. Many years ago, my wife was asleep. I was going through the mail, and I silently was going to throw this out, and I still remember I had it in my hand, and I said, wait a minute. I'm going to save this and make it into an overhead. Why did I not throw it out? What on here interested me? 5,000 years of a human adventure. So I filed it and saved it. A year later, I got something in the mail, the exact same thing, didn't I?
That still cracks me up.
What happened? Anybody see? Okay.
10,000 years.
In 1 year, it got 10,000 years older. Everything else is identical. Now, this is pure conjecture. Well, let me ask you, what do you think happened? Yes?
Do they get flack for having such a small time frame?
That's what I think. I think they got a lot of flack. Say, wait. That's too close to what biblical people believe about history. And the only thing that changed is they added 10,000 years. None of these changed. The oldest letters, the oldest bathrooms, etc. But that changed. I think that's pretty amazing. All of my slides are free. If anybody wants any of my slides to email people, this would be an interesting thing. So I'm sure glad I saved that. Any comments on that? I love interaction during these. Always feel free to raise your hand if you want to say anything. Okay, this is the easiest thing. I Googled history of civilization. And I got not a million, maybe I did. I got tons of hits. One of the first ones, the earliest recorded history of any civilization dates back what? 5,000 years. Shakatassian, whatever, civilization dates back to the 4th millennium BC. That's Iran, a culture in Iran. Indian civilization, 3200 BC. Minoan, that's Crete, 5000 BC. So 5 or 7,000 years ago. Ecuador, 5,000 years. Nubian, 5,000 BC. Chinese, 5,000 years ago. Oman, and I think that's the last one. That's the last one. If you meet someone, they almost always are prideful and say, our civilization is the oldest, about 5,000 years ago. Well, I just showed you many civilizations, all how long ago?
5,000 years.
So that tells you history goes back how far?
5,000 years.
If you go before 5,000 years, what is it called? It's called prehistoric times. What else can you call it?
Unknown.
Non-historic times. Because there's no history, you follow me? By saying prehistoric times, that's a presupposition that there were things going on. Follow me? But history, civilizations, and languages only go back 5,000 years. That doesn't prove the earth is 5,000 years old. But that shows that the argument from history is that it is not older than that. If there were established civilizations 40,000 years ago, the arguments I would be given would be pretty silly, but these are from non-Christian sources. History only goes back about that far. And were those first civilizations a bunch of knuckle draggers who just got the right chromosome? They were brilliant. They were building pyramids, languages much more complex than that we have. My belief is that God created brilliant humans and they instantly started making brilliant civilizations, okay? So these ancient civilizations were not jumped out of the trees and they barely had 46 chromosomes. They were brilliant. Yes?
Brilliant. So every civilization that we're talking about had a language, had writing skills, had building and architectural skills. They were procreating in the way that we procreate. So there's nothing different that we can tell about them other than they might have been a little smaller.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
There's a book called The Puzzle of Ancient Man by a guy named Chittick. You might want to write that down, The Puzzle of Ancient Man. He looks at ancient civilizations, incredible, brilliant building and construction and languages, etc., all over the earth. And I always say, a lot smarter than us. Our benefit is communication. If I asked you to build a car, you could get on the internet and talk to Australia, Germany, Italy, Japan. 300 years ago, you had to figure the whole thing out yourself.
Yes, true.
So, as a whole, we're increasing, but individually, I think we're going downhill. Yes?
Perhaps a little taller,
Yes?
according to Ken Hovind, as far as, of course, the Bible talks about the Nephilim, but
Mhm.
yeah, you know, I don't know about smaller, but a little bit taller. Due to the pre-flood world where we didn't have the ultraviolet rays and people were living a long I don't mean like 20 feet, but a little taller, you know.
Right. Typically, though, they tend to be shorter, like Neanderthal man was shorter. One little piece of trivia. In the old days, you ate whatever was growing within a couple miles of where you lived, so you could have a lot of vitamin deficiencies. Today, you could eat lettuce from Washington or a pork from Arizona or Arkansas, you see, and get more of a mix. Back then, you could have a lot of vitamin deficiencies. But anyways, they were smart people. Okay, quick thing. Age is not a physical property of an element. What is a physical property? Height, weight, density, temperature, magnetism, etc., chemical composition. You cannot pick up something and determine its age by studying it. It requires assumptions. Ron's going to talk about that later. Okay? So you cannot tell how old this carpet is by studying it scientifically. You need outside information, and if you do come up with a date, you're making a lot of assumptions. Now, this comes up a lot. How many have heard this argument? Okay, if I'm at a college campus and somebody says, well, what about those distant stars? There's quasars 15 billion light years away. What I say to them is I'd say that is a very powerful argument for your belief. You know, we have to grant that. I said it's a very good argument, and if I were old Earth, that would be the first argument that I would use as well. But I say, let's try to break it down. Okay, first, somebody raise your hand and give me a one-word answer to this. A light year is a measurement of what?
Light.
Nope, a good answer.
Speed.
Time.
Yes?
Time?
Not time.
Speed,
What?
distance.
The distance that light travels in the course of a year.
I said one word. One-word answer.
Okay.
Distance.
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 Okay, and I've talked to people who've loved physics who've struggled with this, but then they say, oh, okay, now I know what you're getting at. A light year measures distance. One-word answer to this question. If something is 15 billion light years away, that means it's really what?
Far.
Good, Chris. Saying it your name. Far. Thus, the universe is really
Big.
big. Everyone agrees that I know that the universe is really big. Shaquille O'Neal is a lot bigger than me, but I'm older. Okay? So, size does not always mean age. So, does that mean the universe is really old just because it's really, really big? Well, people would say, well, you know, that light's got to travel through space. You would have to know everything about time, light, and space to be absolutely certain. But I think there's another answer. One of the coolest things about the Bible that most of us here probably believe in, and if you're not, I'm glad you're here, is that as far as I know, it's the only holy book that was not written by just one person. It was a compilation of many people who never met, kings, shepherds, etc., prophets. They never met, but it tells one story. It's a pretty powerful argument. Well, 5 people who never met said, God, what the heavens? What does stretched mean to you? Change the size to make it bigger. So God stretched the heavens. To me, this is really good biblical, powerful arguments. Isaiah in 42:5 and other verses said, God stretched the heavens. Jeremiah, God stretched the heavens. Zechariah 12:1, God stretched the heavens. Job 9:8, and Psalm 104:2. Aristotle was considered the man. He was the bomb in science. If he said it, everybody bowed down to Aristotle because he was the smartest guy going. Well, he didn't talk about an expanding universe. To me, the Bible talks about a universe that changes in size, which contradicted Aristotle's teachings. Now, if the Bible were written by a bunch of guys out to make a buck or to control people, they would listen to the great minds of science. But they didn't. They talked, to me, as I see it, an expanding universe, and perhaps this could explain how the universe could be huge and relatively young if God dynamically stretched the heavens. Any comments on that? Okay, so I think verses that can really make us not ashamed of our Bible, but proud to be readers of it. Real quick one, we talked about this a month ago. Evolutionists think dinosaurs went extinct 65 million years ago. To a lot of you, this will be repeat, but I just couldn't resist doing it again. Creationists think dinosaurs coexisted with people. If they died from Noah's flood, because they're in sedimentary rock, they had to be alive when people were alive, okay? And that's what indicates what killed the dinosaurs that we find. They were buried by a massive violent flood. But 2005, Montana State researcher, her name was Mary Schweitzer, found this. What do you think that is? Very good. Nice and loud.
What is,
Blood tissue.
Right. It's soft tissue, blood vessels. Now again, I know we talked about this last month, but it has to do with the age of the earth. So, they found this blood tissue. Were the evolutionists happy?
no.
Absolutely not.
It was human.
They picked on Mary Schweitzer like you wouldn't believe. They had a T-Rex fossil in a valley they knew was 68 million years old. Well, she gets a huge T-Rex fossil, and they broke it open, and they found this soft tissue. She studied it and came out and said it was blood. Well, other evolutionists said she did bad research, she had sloppy laboratory work, and that she should be ashamed of herself. She wasn't glorified, she was picked on quite a bit.
Because she found
Well-
blood?
Pardon me?
Because she found blood?
Right. They weren't happy at all that they found soft tissue and blood vessels in a T-Rex fossil. Because, you could probably figure why. How in the world could that get inside? Well, leads to this. How in the world could soft tissue be in a 68 million year old fossil? Here are some of the answers that other evolutionists have given. Oh, well, that blood came from another animal. No, this was buried in deep sedimentary rock. It didn't come from another animal. Or by sloppy lab work, somehow they spilled the blood on it. It's filmed from bacteria. No, they did a DNA analysis. It wasn't bacterial. Somehow it was amazingly preserved for 68 million years, right? But never would they say what? Maybe the fossil was not that old. Now, I know I talked about this last month, but I called the Museum of the Mountains, had a very, very nice talk with the man, very polite. I never said, nah, I'm a creationist. We just talked about what he was up to and what he actually found. Politely, I asked him, I said, they said, we're not really sure it's blood. I said, couldn't any crime scene lab in America, any police force find out if it's blood or not within an hour or two? And he chuckled and said, yeah, probably, but we don't have that kind of funding. But he said, no. And we talked, he said, we do have that kind of funding, but we can't be too rash. They've been studying this for years. Every test in the world they're doing, they know it's blood, but they can't be too rash. Because they're afraid if they come out and say it's blood, everyone's going to pick on them, etc. And it's a great argument that these things are not that old. So, a lot of people out there are not seeking truth, they're trying to prove their hypothesis. Yes?
Why? Okay, he said you can't be too rash. Did he define for you what he meant by rash?
Well, they've been studying it for 4 years. Okay? To me, that's not rash. If there was a terrible murder here, the police would know in a half hour if that's a blood stain on the carpet. Number one, they're getting a lot of funding, which is never a bad thing for them. But I think they're just terrified to come out and conclusively say this is soft tissue. But Mary Schweitzer was picked on. Every test indicates it's blood. In other dinosaur fossils that they've broke open, they're finding soft tissue. So it's not the only instance of it. It's more and more common. And it's a very delicate protein. Yes?
Is there any public documentation on this? Or?
Oh, yes. It's all over the internet. And I did talk to him. They're afraid to come out and say it's soft tissue. He said perhaps in a few weeks. I think he's going to stretch it until it's funded. But there are other studies that do say that they're finding soft tissue in dinosaur fossils. Because they typically didn't want to break them, but they broke this one and they're studying the inside of it. And he said the future, very nice guy, we had a great talk. The future of paleontology is genetics, because they're finding so much DNA in some of these fossils. And that's his exact words. Very nice guy, and I wish him the best. Yes?
6,000 years seems like a long time for a soft tissue to last. How long should it last for?
Exactly. That is a long time. Well, the flood of Noah was probably about 5,000 years, and still that's a very long time for the soft tissue to act, but a lot less than 68 million years. So that's a very good point. Okay? But just type in the words dinosaur blood, and you'll find all kinds of hits on this. Very exciting, controversial topic. Yes?
Where was it found again?
Montana.
Okay, as far as, I can understand the lasting a bit because it's more of a colder area versus a hotter area to where it would disintegrate a little bit more rapidly if it was a hotter type of, it's,
And it was a very deep buried fossil. It wasn't like right on the surface like a lot are.
because according to Ken Holman, they were talking about mammoths that were encased in ice for all those years, and they still had the food in their stomachs. So I can understand why, if it's a colder area like Montana, very freezing, how that 6,000 years would be able to keep
Good point.
that intact.
Very good point. High elevation, perhaps. I don't know the elevation. Yes?
Question, he just brought up a point. Those mammoths and so forth that they find in ice, I know when I put meat in the freezer and I don't take it out for a while, it dehydrates.
Mhm.
So they're finding foods and they're looking pretty good and they can tell what it is and they're not dehydrated, they're still,
Right. They
So-
still have oil in their fur. It's pretty amazing.
so they don't have an issue, they're not worried about being too rash about that?
Well, both sides. Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, the reason is because they know that mammoth and man live together.
Yeah.
But there's a big difference between 6,000 years and 6 million years.
They admit.
Yeah, because there was
it.
tropical vegetation that they found.
Buttercups.
Uh-huh.
Yes. Good point. Thanks, Tom. 5 samples of dacite, an igneous volcanic rock from Mount St. Helens, was sent to a lab for sampling. The lava was 10 years old. They didn't tell the lab any other details. The labs love to know the details when they come up with a date. But here they sent them 5 samples from the same lava to come up with a date. Obviously it was 10 years old, right? Not quite. 360,000 years to 2.8 million years. Okay. Now, what's interesting is you would think at least the 5 samples would be at the same date, don't you?
Right.
But because of the amount of argon that was still in the lava sample, you can get wild dates like this. Argon is a gas, it can leak out. But the same lava, well off, and it was only 10 years old. Now, these were creationists, PhDs in geology, though, who prepared the samples. And of course, the evolutionists will say, they're biased, they tainted the sample. No, they prepared it just the way it should be, but very much off. That's why they'd like to know the information. Well, how old is this rock? Well, it came from a volcano 10 years ago. They would have said 10 years. But anyways, the amount of argon in the lava is how they came up with all those different dates. Okay, guess what these are pictures of?
Mars,
Only one of them is Mars.
upper left-hand corner.
This one is Mars. This is a desert. That's the Gobi Desert. This is Arizona. This is the Sahara Desert. One of my favorite arguments that the Earth isn't that young is the planet is dying rapidly. If you leave Riverside and drive east, you see nothing but death and destruction until you hit Arkansas. Any amens to that? Nice people along the way, but it's dying. If it rains, you get a little bit of growth like this. But without man's intervention, the planet is dying. It's not because of global warming or anything. It's the sun. The sun causes mutations and death. This guy has a PhD in plant biology. He's a professor at Cornell. He invented the gene gun. Perhaps he knows more about plants than anybody on Earth. He's a young Earth creationist. He said due to mutations from the sun, plants could not have been around for hundreds of millions of years. So that's a pretty good young Earth argument. And just look around, erosion, the sun is killing this planet, and I don't believe it's been here that long. I really do believe we'd look like Mars if we were 4.6 billion years old, completely dead and lifeless. Any comments on that? Okay. Now, a lot of people say this, there's no incompatibility between the Bible and an old Earth. I hear that all the time. I'm sure a lot of you do too. Once again, people who believe that never got it out of the Bible. They're well-meaning perhaps, born again, but they get so much peer pressure, they say, I've got to fit that into the Bible. Well, I'm going to give 7 reasons the Bible does not teach the earth is billions of years old. Anybody want to shout and guess what some of them might be? Raise your hand. Yes?
When God talks about creating the world in 7 days.
Okay.
Or 6 little days, and then it goes, and in the Bible, days are 24-hour days, years are regular years, months are months. They're not,
Okay.
And if those days, those 24-hour days, were millions of years, sooner or later the sun would come around, but we would have the sun for a while, which means things wouldn't grow. You know,
point.
life wouldn't be sustainable.
Point, yes, Bailey.
Darwin was only born 200 years ago, not 6,000 years ago.
Very good. It's the celebration of his 200th birthday. Anyone? Very good. Anyone else? Genealogies, good. Anyone else?
Oh,
Yes.
The Sabbath day?
Excellent. I think the best reason is the fourth commandment. If someone loves the Bible, and many of them do who believe the earth is old, this is a big problem for them. You can politely say, how many of the 10 commandments do you believe? The fourth commandment says 6 what?
Days.
You shall labor and do all your work, but the Sabbath is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. For in 6 what?
Days.
The Lord made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on the 7th day. Just on Sunday, I was talking to a guy by the playground. He believed in the gap theory, which is the belief that we're sitting on an earth that's billions of years old. Well, this falsifies the gap theory. This falsifies an old earth. Everything was created within 6 days. And this is what the Hebrews always believed, and they know the Hebrew better than we do. If it doesn't mean that, they were supposed to work 6 billion years to get 1 billion years off. Management would love it, the unions would hate it. Amen? So, if you are old earth, this is a tough one for you. You'd have to say, well, those days are symbolic. Well, that's not what the ancient Hebrews believed. They always believed that to be literal. Okay? Reason number 2, each day had an evening and morning. I used to go to Knott Avenue Church, still love it. I didn't leave because of any controversy. I came here because Brad lets me speak once a month. And I do love his teaching, believe me. I love his teaching. There was a very devout, great man of God, Christian elder at Knott Avenue who believed in an old earth. And my wife told him, well, the days of Genesis have an evening and morning. And she forgot about it. A month later, he came up and said, Bill, Jennifer, I'm young earth now. And we said, great, why? Because he couldn't reconcile this. He never really studied it. But God is smarter than us. Seminaries don't teach that often enough, do they? They teach that we know the Bible better than God himself. But 6 times it's repeated that the days had an evening and morning. Okay? So that we wouldn't be able to explain it away. But some people do try to explain it away. Dr. Hugh Ross gives talks about, he probably won't like the word creation, but perhaps intelligent design. He says he believes the Bible. I'm not going to bash on him tonight. But he believes that the earth is billions and billions of years old. How many people have never heard of Hugh Ross? Don't feel bad. How many have heard? Okay, he gives a lot of lessons. Well, he would say, you guys don't know the Hebrew well enough.
yeah.
Morning means beginning and evening means ending. So, you follow me? Let's translate the Bible with morning meaning beginning and evening meaning ending. So everybody nice and loud, interpret the verse. And there was what? No. Interpret it according to Dr. Hugh Ross. And there was, and there was. Does that make any sense to you? Makes no sense at all to say there was ending and there was beginning the 3rd day. Why does the Bible have evening before morning?
Because the day starts at Sabbath, like 6 o'clock in the evening.
That's a Sabbath.
6 to 6.
That's a Hebrew day. The Hebrew day starts with the evening, and that's what the Bible teaches that those days had. Evening and morning. So, very powerful argument against what Dr. Ross would say. Reason number 3, ordinal numbers. Suppose I said, tell me about the day of Lincoln. Oh, the day of Lincoln, he was born in a log cabin, became president, freed the slaves, and they got shot. Okay, tell me about the 3rd day of Lincoln. Oh, he was crying all night and made a mess in his diaper. Once you put an ordinal number in front of day, it means literal day. And it always means that in the Bible as well. The Hebrew word is yom. If there's an ordinal number in front of it, it means day, like 2nd day, 3rd day. Okay? Quick little lesson. It doesn't say first day in the Hebrew, it's day 1. The NIV calls it the first day, but other translations properly call it day 1. And I'm not a Hebrew scholar, you guys are more than I, but I heard a PhD in Hebrew say this word really encompasses it as a 24-hour day. So, but the other days are 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th. Did God create paradise? Very, very important. I was at USC talking to a Jesuit student. He was old earth. I asked him, did God create paradise? I remember his reaction. He smiled and said, I know exactly what you're getting at. And he said, that's a good point. If the earth is old, God created death, destruction, mayhem, struggling for survival. The Bible teaches that didn't happen until when? Sin. How did sin enter the world? Adam and Eve, right. So Romans 5:12, 1 Corinthians 15:21, the whole nature of God changes if you believe in an old earth, that God is not a creator of mayhem. When man fell, the creation became cursed. So just going back up to there, it changes the nature and message of God if you believe in all the death and struggle before man fell. Okay? Reason 5. Adam, a real person, because he was assigned a date of death. He was 930 years old. Almost everyone I know believes he lived through the 7th day. So at least that 7th day had to be shorter than 900 years old. Okay? Jesus said at the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. So there's 2 timelines. Here's the old earth timeline. Here's the beginning. Here's today. Humans were created about here. You know, billions of years after the beginning of the creation. According to Mark 10:6, humans were at the beginning of the creation. Here's the beginning, here's today. Humans are there about 6,000 years ago at the beginning of the creation. And this is also quoted in Matthew chapter 19, that humans were there at the beginning. One of the purposes of man is to take dominion over the creation. Why would God create? Did he go bowling? Did he, I don't know, have some pizza and wait for man to show up and take dominion? I believe that's an argument for man showing up at the beginning of creation. And then there's ecosystems. Look at flowers and insects. The flowers need the insects need the flowers. The flower needs the sun, needs the soil. For ecosystems, a short creation week makes more sense. Now you've all heard this before. The verse that says, with the Lord a day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is a day. And this is all on your blue sheets. You all got a blue sheet. You don't have to look at it now. This verse is not talking about creation. It's talking about God's patience for men to repent. Okay, 2 Peter 3 has nothing to do with creation. It talks about people repenting and God being patient. Time means nothing to God. He's outside of time. Time means everything to us. Yes?
It also says that the days like 1,000 years to the Lord, or a watch in the night. So that was typically what, 3 or 4 or a period. So I never hear them state that, but it's just the thing. He's out of our time. It's irrelevant again.
Right.
So.
Good point. Very good point. Yes?
Yeah, but also the evolutionists think that day, the days are millions and millions of years. Okay, if there's a gap there, then God's saying that day is 1,000 years.
Right.
So
Not even close to it.
yeah, I mean, I believe it's a day, but that they believe it's millions. Then if you're going to take that, you're going to say, okay, a day's 1,000 years. So.
Right. And then it cancels out. And 1,000 years is as a day.
Yep.
That part they leave out. Yes, sir?
Could God have created a whole earth like he created Adam whole already?
Well, to quote my dad, yes, I believe Adam was an adult. My dad is my type of guy. Never went to college, says he hasn't read a book since college or high school. But to me, he's one of the wisest, most intelligent people I've met. We're coming home from golfing one day, and he said, Bill, Adam and Eve had to be adults. This is when time stands still for me. I said, why is that, Dad? Because I know some wisdom's coming. He said, because babies are helpless. And that makes all the sense. A one-day-old baby is beautiful. It can't even lift its head. So I believe the first humans were mature, the first rodents were mature, the first dogs were mature, etc. But still, I don't know how you could say a rock is billions of years old. I went to a church in Fountain Valley. I asked the pastor, how old is the earth? He said, billions of years old. I said, why? He said, it looks old. And I said, compared to what? You see? Age being relative. So I do believe the creation was mature, but not old enough to come up with billions of years old. I believe it was plush, full of vegetation, which eventually became our oil, which is a whole nother lesson. But I don't think it looks billions of years old. But it was mature, like Adam and Eve. Yes?
How did they then determine that the old civilization was 5,000 years old?
Oh, documentation, written records, oral history that has been passed down to be that old. Good question. Yes?
One more second. If the Earth is billions and billions and billions of years old, then what about oxygen?
Right. What
Okay,
about clean
you know,
water?
Yeah, clean water. You can't have oxygen without trees, and vice versa. Billions and billions of years, there were no trees. You know, I mean,
Right.
the oxygen would have been depleted. What do we get? You know,
Sure, sure. Well, how could oil stay in the ground all those millions and millions of years under high pressure without leaking? There's many problems with that. There's the water cycle, but still, you're polluting it faster than you're cleansing it. There's many problems for that. Okay, well, now I turn it over to Ron. Big round of applause for Ron, everybody.
You might want to wait until afterwards.
Yeah.
Okay, first slide. Okay, we're going to go on a slide presentation tonight, much like your parents did when you were growing up. You had slides as you got older and older. So we're going to take that approach in talking about the Earth. Next slide, please. Again, I just want to go back to, I firmly believe that a day was simply 24 hours. Next. We're going to take a look at the contrast, or the contradictions between Genesis and the geological ages. Next one, please. If you look at on the left, you've got evolution, and we'll just go through a couple of those, and then when we put the other side up, we'll look at the comparisons. Matter existed in the beginning. Land before oceans, marine organisms were the first life, insects before fruit trees, land animals before whales, and dinosaurs before birds. Next one, please. If you look on what the Bible says, this is matter created by God in the beginning. It's the opposite, isn't it, of what evolution is teaching. Oceans before the land. Again, it's the opposite. Land plants first were the first life. Fruit trees before insects, whales before animals, birds before dinosaurs. Yes?
Land before oceans is what the evolutionists believe?
Mm-hmm.
Where'd they come up with the water?
You'd have to ask them.
Interesting.
You know, they kind of believe that the land was here and the water kind of formed because of all the gases and the pressure and everything, and eventually we ended up with that primordial soup that they talk about often. Does anybody have another comment about that? Because I'm not real strong on that part. I think that's it. Okay, next please. Okay, so where is the evidence for great ages? Is it in the rocks or the fossils? Okay, why do you say that?
because with the fossils, you're going to have, this is just one thing. With the fossils, you're going to have, you have all kinds of different, you have clams, and you have other animals in the same stratosphere.
Strata.
Yeah, stratosphere. Whereas if evolution were true, you'd have like the little organisms and little sea things at the bottom, and then the next layer would be like the birds, and the next layer would be like the insects and everything. But the fossils, it's all kinds of deep,
Okay, we'll go into that in a little more detail in a little bit, but it's interesting to hear what you think this time. Next one, please. Okay, sedimentary rocks are laid down by water, and I think that's what you were talking about. Okay, fossils are mainly marine. When they find fossils, and a little bit later there's some numbers on it, most of the fossils found throughout the world are simply marine life. Next, please. Okay. Is there possibly another way of looking at this, or another interpretation of looking at the evidence that's out there currently? Next slide, please. Perhaps major flooding answers a lot of those questions. Yes? Okay, we're going to take a look at one of the principles that evolutionists rely heavily on. Okay, that's the principle of uniformity. You can read the different steps in here, but basically what it's saying is that how we view life, what's actually taking place presently, the scientific laws taking place presently, are the key to the past, and they've always been that way. That's basically what they're trying to tell you up here. We'll just go, that's all right, next slide.
So what they're trying to say is that our history has been linear?
No, they're trying to say that scientifically, things we look at and the methods we use and what we see taking place today is the same thing that took place in the far distant past. Okay? Time or anything is the same now as it was, in their belief, billions of years ago. It's always been consistent. That's what they're trying to say with that principle of uniformity.
So,
They need that to make their system work.
so are they talking about the basic laws that you and I would know of as gravity and?
Correct.
Do they-
And other principles that they use in trying to define their belief.
Do they define who created those laws, that everything obeys?
No.
Okay.
They'll tell you who discovered the law, but they don't know where they came from. And they usually, I haven't found anybody that really gives you an explanation of how they got here, how they started because of a Big Bang. Next, please. Oh, I'm sorry. We're going to take a look at some different things that take place on Earth through their viewpoint of uniformity. We take a look at the salt that's in the ocean. But basically, the amount of salt in the ocean is from erosion. When it rains, it erodes, it picks up the minerals and the chemicals in the water, goes to the rivers, tributaries, and ends up in the ocean. And just taking that on how science looks at it today, the Earth could not be any older than 62 million years. Okay? That's using their numbers, their scientists, 62 million. Now Bill said earlier it was how many?
3.4 billion.
I think it's 4.6. 4.6 billion years old is the current number. Next slide, please. We can take erosion, and I kind of messed up the two, didn't I? But basically, erosion is as the water washes everything down, it's going to bring the soil and everything into the ocean. And under the current way that we look at things, how it happens, the rates of erosion and how much silt and stuff goes into the ocean, the Earth could only be 14 million years old. So all of a sudden we went from 62 to 14 using their scientific methods.
But yet they work in a reverse for the Grand Canyon because it's so deep. They said, well, it had to be older because in order
Yeah.
for erosion, which we see now to happen that deep, it'd have to be going backwards and now,
Yes. Yeah, they have to move things around to make it work. And we'll get to the Grand Canyon in a couple
Okay.
minutes. Next, please. Okay, accumulation of sediments in the ocean, and it's very similar. They can go to the ocean now and measure how much sediment's in there. They can take the rate that sediment is being delivered into the ocean, considering even what we as people do, okay, by cutting trees down and by, clearing the land. They've calculated all that into their models, and again, they come up with 14 million years. Next, please. Predictions of a flood model would tell us certain things. Next, please. Catastrophic deposition, and that's simply the stuff spread all over the place. Next, please. Regional, I'm terrible.
Stratigraphy.
Yeah, stratigraphy. This means strata. Okay, next. Sediments deform before hardening. Okay, they're not regular. Next, please. Rapid canyon erosion. Okay, and this is what floods would show you. Next, please. Okay, dating results would be inconsistent with this.
regional stratigraphy. whatever. Does that mean that the strata would be different in different locations?
Not necessarily, but it can be. It just means that every place you go, you're going to see strata.
Okay.
Okay? Next one, please. This is obviously the Grand Canyon. If you haven't been there, we've all seen the pictures of the Grand Canyon. And obviously, the evolutionists have to believe that this happened over gradual time. And there's a lot of different things that show that it's not. And we're just going to take a couple of those. Next, please. How many remember Mount St. Helens? How many lived in this area or around? Okay. How many had to clean stuff off their car? This was in, I believe, 1985. And Mount St. Helens was a volcano that erupted, and it basically blew half of the mountain off. The mud flows that created this that we're looking at here was traveling at 90 miles an hour. And it created a miniature Grand Canyon about a 1/40th scale in just a few hours. Okay? It didn't take millions of years, thousands of years, just a few hours. Next, please. This is another thing that shows that burial was rather quickly of animals and things during the flooding. If you notice this fish here, if you notice at the head end, you can see the tail of another fish. It's in the process of eating.
Okay.
Now, somebody tell me how they tell you fossils are formed. Slowly. So, that fish was eating for a long time. The other one didn't work its way out, and it didn't break apart, deteriorate, right? Like things do. If we put two fish and put them under the dirt, we came back in a year, it wouldn't look like that, would it? Okay, so it shows it happened rapidly. Next one, please. This is kind of hard to see, but the stalactites and stalagmites, someone tell me how long it takes to form. Millions of years. You go to any one of the parks that have them, they'll tell you millions of years. What they're trying to show you there is that's a wing of a bat.
What's a wing?
A bat. Yeah, if they took this and used the systems they have now, and Chris could tell better, what kind of X-ray or what they do to see what's in there, Chris?
X-ray?
Yeah, or
MRI?
MRI would work. You would see the skeleton in there. But the point is, you've got a bat in there. Now, so that bat, according to evolutionary theory, for it to work, landed on there and died, but didn't deteriorate over millions of years so that the rest of it could get covered, correct? So, looking at both models, which one works best? Creation, a global flood where everything happened very quickly, or evolution? Next, please. Let's take a look at the real fossil record. Next slide, please. 95% of all fossils are marine fossils, primarily shellfish. Next. 95% of the remaining 5% are plants. That can kind of throw you off. Out of 100%, 5% are plants. Next. 95% of the rest of that are fish. It's just getting smaller and smaller. If we did it, we're doing decimal points and everything. We just want to know it's less. Most of the rest are insects. What is the most numerous thing on the earth today?
Bugs?
Insects. And Bill brought it up at one. It was a particular kind is the most, right? Beetles, if I remember. Next, please. Less than 1%. Now that 1% is 1% of what's left out of the 5% after you took all the other out. So it's not 1% of 100, it's 1% of that 5%, what was left of that. Are land vertebrates. What are land vertebrates? Us, and most animals, right? These usually consist of less than one bone. in that percentage.
No wonder they get so excited when they find out.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think as Bill and what was mentioned, the last one, most of what we see are copies, and what most scientists study are copies. So when you go to a museum and stuff, you see a lot of them, so you think there's a lot. The real ones aren't out there for you to see. Those are copies. So that kind of deceives you a little bit. Next, please. Okay, we're going to go into the dating a little bit. And I'm going to grab my glasses and hopefully I can read a couple notes. Okay, radiometric or radioisotope dating, and go to the next one, please. Okay, just how do you date rocks? Somebody tell me. Okay. Carbon dating. Carbon dating you can't use for rocks. Carbon dating is only good for living things that lived at one time and are now dead.
Don't they usually tell how old a rock by what the fossils are that they found near the rock?
Very good. And we'll go into that a little bit more.
We don't hear her.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Basically, what she said is you tell how old a rock is by checking what the fossils are that were found at that same level. Okay? Next one, please. This is a geological column, and it was first formed in the 1800s, and I think it was mid-1800s. And I think we have another slide on this, so I don't want to jump ahead. Go ahead, Bill, that's all right. Which one of these came first? The geological column or radiometric dating, which is a scientific method of dating that we all go by? It's a geological column. Now, doesn't that seem a little odd? Okay. Why is that column science? Where did that come from? What developed it?
Man's imagination.
It was a man's observation, his imagination, trying to make sense of what he saw, believing that the Earth had to be millions of years old and it had to be through an evolutionary process. When currently science is using radioisotopes to date things. Okay? I'll just go briefly over some of how the dating works. Go ahead, Bill. I'm sorry. We'll come back to this. I'm sorry, Bill. Yeah. Go backwards. I'm sorry. Just the dating, they use different isotopes. Bill brought up argon, which is a gas. It's an unstable gas in some forms, and it breaks down to a stable gas. You've got potassium that breaks down to argon. You've got lead. A lot of people know this from school. Lead 206 breaks down to lead 207. They're making three assumptions when they're dating with radioisotopes. They're saying that we know initially what it was like when that atom first became unstable. Okay? You've got an unstable atom. They say we know what the conditions were like. That's that uniformity again. The second thing they have to do is during the history of that atom as it was breaking down from when it was first formed until it broke down, that was consistent. Okay, and then the next one would be the decay rate, the amount of time that it takes for it to change from one atom, which is unstable, to a stable one, is consistent throughout time. Yes?
Now, that's what they're assuming. Have they seen instances in science of the atoms that they're assuming decay happening at different rates?
No, they haven't. And one of the reasons why is, let's take carbon-14, which was brought up earlier. Carbon-14 is made from cosmic rays that produce unattached neutrons that combine with nitrogen 14 becomes carbon-14. Okay? When it becomes that, carbon-14, that is called the parent atom. The different stages as it breaks down into its final stage are called daughters. So a lot of times people think it goes directly from one to the other. It doesn't. A lot of them go through stages. It can be very rapid or slow before it becomes the daughter. And that's where part of the problem is. the half-life of a carbon-14 atom is 5,730 years. So, as Bill was talking earlier, we can only attest to how long we've been here. We don't know if anybody has been here, you know, on recording stuff. 5,730 years ago, actually wrote down that information, and we got a chance to look at it. Also, on dating the half-life, we have to understand that half-life is not a measurement of time. It's a measurement of the atom decaying. They're totally different things. Okay? A couple interesting things about carbon dating and how it's used. The RATE team, and I'll just go briefly, it's a group from ICR in San Diego. They put together a group of very well-known creation scientists, and they studied for 7 years the dating methods. And some of the things they checked was coal. They took coal samples dated at 34 million to 311 million years old, had carbon-14 in it. Now, if the half-life is only 5,730 years, they're saying carbon-14 is good, they say, for maybe 100,000 years, and that's it. There's no reliability beyond that. So how do you get 34 million or 311 million? They find diamonds. How long does it take to make a diamond? Somebody know? Millions of years is what they tell you. They find carbon-14 in it. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, anybody have an idea what we're looking at here? These are called polystrate fossils. And even people that study geology really don't study these very often. You won't find them in the textbooks because geologists will tell you it's an anomaly. These are trees, okay, that are petrified. Next one, please. This is just a graphic of what happens. The tree breaks off, it floats, and the end with the root gets heavier because it soaks in more water, sinks to the bottom into the sediment, and it stays there. Next slide. There's a couple famous places in Yellowstone, and trying to see, I know on there it says where this is. I guess the next one does, but you can see the petrified trees there. Okay, next one, please. This is Specimen Ridge, and if you go there, you can see them all the way up the side of this mountain.
How did they say that that unique anomaly occurred?
Yeah, according to evolution, for something to petrify, it would have to be just in one level, correct?
Yeah.
These are on all different levels of strata. Okay, which, if we went back to that geological table, would be different years.
And they
different
have to have
years.
been covered by water, they admit that.
Absolutely, had to be underwater, which indicates what? A flood.
Right? And it couldn't have risen up because the trees wouldn't still be in the strata.
Right,
Because they only grow at a certain height.
correct.
They got a problem.
Yes. Next one, please. Basically, if you'd like to read this, what he's saying is there are a lot of methods out there that date the age of the Earth. Here, I believe he says there's only about a dozen that indicate that it's old. I like that he says it's only about a dozen because he talks about 10. So, the other 90% of those processes give you ages of the Earth less than billions of years. And this is a well-known scientist. Next, please. Okay, we're just going to take a look at some other things real quick. Galaxy, our galaxy, but they're winding very fast.
Spinning?
Yes. And when you study this process and run the physics and all the math on it, I'm just going to go a little bit quicker. Again, their evolutionists are telling us it's 10 billion years old. But the actual facts, because of what it's doing at this time, the evidence, it has to be less than 100 million years old. Again, another limit that's not that 4.6 billion. Next, please. There's not enough supernova remnants in our galaxy. Anybody know what a supernova is? Yes, young lady.
It's when a large star that uses up a lot of energy explodes and it leaves remnants in space, and it's called a supernova.
Excellent. Beautiful. Everybody hear that? Supernovas take place in our galaxy about every 25 years. Okay? So there's only remnants of about 200. That would give our galaxy an age of about 7,000 to 14,000 years. And again, this is using their science, this is what's out there. Next slide, please. The Earth's magnetic field, it's losing energy. Okay? It loses half its energy every 1,454 years. Lost energy faster during, I'm lost here. Anyways, during the Genesis flood, it took place, it would have gone at a more rapid pace. And that equals what the scientists are trying to tell us about what's happening in the magnetic field. That's a whole different study. It could take you a long time. But they're saying the maximum age is about 20,000 years. And for those that are interested in, and they hear all this stuff, that the magnetic field has changed many times, I just ask you to go and take a look at the Pacific Ridge, in the middle of the ocean, and look at that pretty well, and it'll explain why the magnetism is the way it is, and why it has the appearance of changing more often than just a few times. Next, please. Agriculture is too short. Appearance of man, about 185,000 years before man learned how to plant. They're saying that we only learned how to plant things about 10,000 years ago. And man lived on Earth for 185,000 years. During this time period, those same men, they find evidence of tools. They lived in caves. They made drawings. They built monuments. They actually charted the movement of the moon. But they didn't understand that if I took this seed and put it here, that something would grow that I could eat. Next, please. Written history, and Bill talked about this as well. Again, they're saying man was about 190, 185,000 years of recorded history. But we only started writing 4,000 to 5,000 years ago.
But it was very sophisticated.
Yes.
We waited.
And again, people were drawing in caves. We were building these big monuments that were very sophisticated. They were looking at the stars and the moon, and they were building things that followed the stars and the moon. So they obviously had ability to think and reason, but they couldn't figure out any kind of language. Next, please. I think that's it. Any questions?
I got a question. I got more of a statement. I listen to Science Scripture and Salvation whenever I can. I remember at least 15 years ago, and I still remember it. They talked about the lunar landing in '69 and how many of the people involved in that were evolutionists. Obviously, thought that the universe was billions of years old. So they thought that because of billions of years, the dust on the moon would be like 6 or 7 or 8 feet high. And when you look at the lunar module, you see each leg that they used to land has a little saucer on it. So that the module wouldn't, when it lands, wouldn't just sink into the dust.
They've all redone all the figures and that on that, so they really have downplayed that, and it's kind of a non-issue now.
Yeah.
One thing I did.
That was interesting, though.
Yes, on Saturday that I didn't do today was I had a candle sitting up here and I lit it, and I let it burn the whole time. The purpose for that was to talk about the problems with the dating, maybe to help you remember. I blew the candle out, and if you measured how much it burnt during that hour, let's say it burnt 1 inch, okay? Using that uniformity, could I tell how tall this candle was and how long it burned by using that information? By using their method, you should be able to. But things aren't consistent. This is a different color candle. The wicks could be different. The atmosphere could be different when this candle burned. I took one candle, this is an experiment, after I got out of the shower and put it in the bathroom, closed the door while it was still burning. Let it burn for an hour. Guess what? It burned at a slower rate than the candle that was in air. If it was exposed to more oxygen, it would burn faster. So that's the problems with the dating. Those assumptions they're assuming are consistent all the time, that the time of decay is the same. And we can look at two candles and know that they're not going to burn at the same rate. Okay? And we're assuming that the conditions were the same. This candle set over there and burned. Actually, this one right here. This other one burned in the shower, burned at a totally different rate. So they're saying again that it has to be consistent. That's how their dating system works. So I hope that helps explain part of that. Any other questions? That's it then. If I could just ask one favor. Steve, you have your Bible open. Could you read Colossians 2:8? This verse really speaks to me about evolution. We'll give him just a second. This wasn't planned. I caught him off guard. I saw his Bible there. Colossians 2:8.
It's in the Old Testament. Well, you want me to read it
Yeah,
aloud?
could you
Oh.
please?
He told me to read it.
Yes, that's true.
Beware lest any man spoil you through philosophy and vain deceit, after the tradition of men, after the rudiments of the world, and not after Messiah.
Now, isn't that what evolution is trying to do? They want us to believe what man needs to believe, to not believe in God. Thank you very much. Do we have someone who's closing prayer?
You.
Okay. Let's close in prayer. Dear Lord,